Hello,
You.
everyone. I'm sorry that I can't be with you all in person for this very exciting conference, but it's just wonderful that I can actually be here with you virtually. Anyway, let's get stuck into some big old Scottish trees. And I want to start with a Skipinish oak, which is actually a Quercus petraea. When I was doing the presentation, I started thinking about Quercus robur, but I find that Quercus petraea is the largest by girth for an A-form tree, and I'll come to that later, in Scotland. And this one is 8 meters in girth and a fantastic find. While we're looking at this picture, however, note the Sitka spruce in the background. This is now in a glade, been saved, possibly just in time. But look at the dead limbs, presumably from competition from that shade until the recent past. So let's look at where it stands in the tree registers database. This is the tree register is a micro charity with dedicated volunteers. It's a wonderful organization, and this is really the only way in which we can use to establish one tree in terms of height or girth, the champion features easily in different parts of the country and in the UK and the British Isles and Ireland as a whole. And you'll notice that the Skipinish oak is quite low down in the rankings. It comes about number 6. But if you look above, you'll see that the top one is a C category stem, which means it's a multi-stem, basically, multiple stem or coppice. So that's not really fair to compare that with a single stem. And then you'll notice that the Jedburgh oak here is could be considered the largest, but that's got a B form tree stem. And that's really one where, because the main stem is splitting apart or looks as though it's splitting apart, it may be maybe increasing the measurement at 1.5. Then there's the Darnaway oak, but I'm afraid we've lost that one. Since it was recorded in 2019, it's gone. And then we come to the Lee Park one, and of course, that's long gone. So here we are with the champion oak for Scotland, the Skipinish oak, in right up beyond Fort William. It's an incredible find. So it was actually found probably this century. Might have been known about locally, of course, but it's only been recorded onto the database in 2022. And it's called the Skipinish oak because of the group Skipinish. And it actually won winner of the UK 2024 Tree of the Year competition. Let's look at that tree in comparison with other trees in other parts of the country. So the actual largest by girth in England is the Elizabeth I oak. That's got a girth of 13.15 meters. Then in Wales, of course, we lost the Ponfaddock oak, which fell in 2013. That's the Garthmunnel at 1086. Then in Ireland, we've got one at 768, which gives you a comparison of the different trees around the UK and in Ireland. The 10th largest by girth with an A form is 7.34. That's at Châtellerault. So I hope you might have a chance to see that tomorrow, but I'm not entirely sure where it is. What strikes me about this amazing tree is that it's so far north. It's up beyond Fort William. It's near the Great Fault from just below Inverness. And I think it's incredible that we have such a big oak that is growing to such a huge size, right up almost at the limit of oak in the UK. We aren't really utilizing this database as much as we possibly could to think about comparisons, think about how where trees are and how they're growing. But it's also quite a find. The tree that we're talking about is this orange yellow one with a star. You can see where it is in terms of the Sitka spruce plantation. But if you look to the left, you can see the old OS map. And obviously it was in some sort of more a different type of habitat in the past. I'm not quite sure what that um, uh, uh, symbology means in this case. But I also look at the other finds here, and I look along the river and I see these individual dots, some of which have been recorded as incredible trees. And those dots represent individual trees. And if you look back at the aerial photograph, you can see many of those dots are still there today. If the map is over 150 years old now, then those trees were mature at least when they were recorded to the map. So it would be well worth having a second look at any of those dots that still exist there. Uh, this is the map from the Ancient Tree Inventory. That's another wonderful database of trees, and it allows you to do this wonderful comparison between the satellite, the Ordnance Survey, and these old maps. I'm a bit saddened that we have such poor network connectivity across the UK because it means recording is made so much harder. I tried to do some in Cornwall earlier this year and the connectivity was poor. And then, of course, the ATI is a bit clunky. And so it is sad that these systems aren't able to be resourced as well as they should be because they're doing such an important job. Anyway, let's also look at use then. And of course, one has to have a picture of the Fortingal yew. This was taken by Owen Johnson of the Tree Register. Um, and it shows you how difficult it is to take a picture of the Fortingal yew. And the database for the Troby database indicates that this is a D form of stem, which means that it's a tricky tree. And I think we can all agree that. And the statement to go with it on the tree register talks about how it's split into many parts and the approximate sizes that have been given to it. So here it is, way at the top in Fortingal Church, with a provisional girth of 11 meters 47. But look at the next one, which is right down at 7 meters, but still a C-form tree. And then to get to the A's, one is coming right down to 5 meters 68 at Hopetown House. So it's quite useful to be able to compare shapes and sizes, but it's also wonderful if people have put pictures on so that you can actually see that as well. And I would really ask you to consider becoming volunteers for the Tree Register and help populate these databases and with pictures and also keep them up to date because champion trees need to be looked at regularly so that if they start to change or if they are lost, as we've been hearing, then we can keep a record and the king is dead, long live the king, recognize the next one in line. But let's just think about the Fortingal Yew. Located right in the heart of the Highlands of Scotland. It's amazing, really, because if it is as old as people think it is, and it has been provisionally aged by the Ancient Yew Group specialists as potentially 2,000 years old, if it is that old, was it did it establish itself naturally in that location? When actually, although this isn't totally accurate, you can see that the other ancient yews that have been recorded are actually a long way away from the Fortingal yew. It's on its own in the middle there. So was it planted? In which case, all those years ago, what was at that location that meant a yew would be planted by humans there? And if it's naturally distributed, then what's happened to all the other trees that might have been able to seed it into that location? Or is it chance long distance dispersal? A bird took a seed and happened to drop it in that particular location by the church. Clearly, religion and the church has managed to protect the tree for many throughout the centuries. But here we can look at the frequency distribution of yews of known girth. And as many yew specialists have said, we have a very high number of the ancient and veteran yews in its natural distribution. Compared with other countries in Europe and parts of Asia, we are exceptionally lucky, but also that brings huge responsibilities. So over 1,000 in these higher girth categories, but bear in mind recent dendrochronological work done by Toby Hinson and others, Andy Moore, have looked at a yew with a girth of 4.39 meters, not much more than the red line here, at Ropley Church, and have actually indicated that it's 600 the minimum 627 years old. So even these smaller girth yews, we shouldn't be dismissing as not of interest or of less interest. Anyway, the tree register, I'm a trustee, and it is a fantastic little organization, a micro charity. It builds on the great work of Alan Mitchell, who was a dendrologist for the Forestry Commission and really gathered a huge database of information. And his work was built on predecessors. So we've got the first great survey of trees, which includes some of the biggest trees in the country at the time by John Evelyn. That was a major survey that sort of mirrored the Doomsday Book, really, and hasn't possibly been done ever since in quite the same way. But it's built on other great tree hunters like Elwes and Henry and Loudon and others. But the key thing about the tree register database is it's not just native trees, it's a whole range of other species. They now have a database of 270,000 of our most notable trees, and that includes 80,000 champion trees of many, many different species. And some of those have been established in the country for hundreds of years, like the London plane, or perhaps hundreds of years, the Douglas fir. It gives us an idea of which trees really can cope with the climate as it exists at the moment, where they've been brought in from other countries. So that is a wonderful resource. It may not be a total indication of what can cope with the future, but I know that Prof. Mick Crawley is thinking about developing that further using the database and other expert opinion to see whether we can come up with a more expert view on what trees might do well into the future. Another huge girthed Scottish tree, and of course, one can't talk about big old trees in Scotland without talking about Scots pine. This is the Mar Lodge Scots pine. It's a very big B category tree on the database. It's the second largest bee girth tree in Scotland. Look at its open grown form, those horizontal limbs, and in particular, the one which is just recently fallen off the tree when Ted and I visited it some years ago. And it's a massive lower limb that was coming out horizontal from the trunk, more or less where he's standing. An incredible uh, uh, lower lateral limb, which will have biodiversity value of its own interest. Um, so we need to think very carefully about some of these trees and what they're telling us. So Scots pine is one of our most light demanding species in Europe. If it's grown in the open like this and has this open grown form, we know that for all its life, it's been in a grazed landscape and has been kept open. Competition has been kept away from it. It's a very overlooked trait, and yet it's something that Franz Vera looked at very carefully when he was producing his hypothesis about the past landscapes. And really, that's what I want to talk to you about a lot in terms of the next part of my talk. Here we have Scots pine, extremely low tolerance to shade. And look, then juniper, hawthorn. In this lower section, you get lots of trees. In fact, about 50% of them require fair to large open light amounts of light. We can compare that with work that's recently come out of Denmark under the Aarhus University, Jens Christian Svenning. Amazing new research that's coming from this fantastic university. And he's comparing, this particular study compares the closed forest with the semi-open, we would know this as wood pasture, but it's really a savanna landscape, open trees in grassland. And they've looked at vascular plants in temperate climates and look at the huge numbers that need light. We are wrong when we think about closed canopy as being the natural system. All these plants need incredible amounts of light to survive. And so this is something that we're gradually gathering more and more information about, is how important the open treed landscape is compared with the closed canopy. But talking about these particular traits like tolerance to shade or need for light, very interesting work coming out of France. We had a presentation in Sweden recently by Artemis Anest, and they're looking way back in time at the traits, where these traits come from and how they've evolved, and how these evolutionary traits will be able to cope because they are still there in the trees and plants, how they will respond to different ecological challenges and also to other herbivores as well. So fabulous stuff that's coming out of other parts of Europe. And we know about some of these interesting characteristics. How far back do they develop in ecological history, deep, deep time. For example, the holly, this particular pollard, this is a picture when it was standing. The lower branches had leaves with prickles. The upper branches had lost, the leaves had lost their prickles. But when it fell over, the lower branches, which were in grazing reach, started to develop prickles again. Amazing a response from plants to that. So species adaptations are associated with the environment in which the species evolved. And there's other research by Tristan Charles Dominique out of France again, and they're looking at the development of what they call cage architecture, and how long it's taken for species to develop spines and then develop this protective cage architecture, which we know from our wood pastures. It's the thorn is the mother of the oak, and in France they say the bramble is the cradle of the oak. So how far back does it go? And they've looked at it and discovered that it goes back 40 odd million years, where you start to get spines developing. And then what they show is, as you get the rise of the evolution of the bovid animals, so that's your cattle and your bison, and huge pressure is put on trees, the benefits of spines actually really develop dramatically, and you get this co-evolution of the herbivore along with the adaptation by the plant itself. So fabulous ecological evolutionary research, which is I find absolutely fascinating. On a different tack, we believe in we've been led to believe that pollen is the major information for what is native or not native. And I just want to digress here a bit. Friends of my parents actually alerted me to this old Neolithic trackway, which is made out of Scots pine. It's been dated to the Neolithic times, 2,900 years ago. Yet we've been led to believe that Scots pine is really only native in Scotland, that after it went through, it arrived in Britain 9,500 years ago, moved up, got into Scotland about 8,000 years ago, and disappeared from England. But I don't believe these people went to Scotland to get their Scots pine to make their trackway. It was there. If it was there, why isn't the pollen telling us the same story? And here we have different research done by Nikki Whitehouse and her colleagues. And here you have the study sites for subfossil beetles, which mirrors some of the pollen sites. And South Yorkshire is in light blue, the Midlands in pink, and the sites in white in the middle in southern England. Now this is complicated, but look for the red pillars here on this particular graph. And I've tried to make it a little bit more helpful in terms of clarity, because you can see that these red pillars exist right the way through. This is a timeline across the bottom from 9,500 years ago, coming right up to 2,000 years ago. And you can see that pine is present. And if you look at some of these sites, remember, blue is South Yorkshire, pink is Midlands, and white is southern Britain. You can see that pine, and the red relates to obligate beetles associated with pine. We're talking about probably talking about old growth beetles associated with pine that have been preserved in these cores and looked at, put into the database, and is demonstrating that beetles are a really good indicator of what the tree composition was, probably more reliably than the pollen data. And again, we have other data given to us by Keith Alexander, recent work by Keith. He looked at this particular beetle, which is very rare in the British landscape today. It's associated with 290-year-old or more 5-meter girth oaks. That's where it's found today. They're open grown trees. If those trees are shaded, it limits the weevil activity, and obviously the trees themselves are vulnerable to being lost. And this demonstrates that this is trees in an open treed landscape. It's a wood pasture and parkland landscape. That's what these weevils are, like Windsor Great Park, where it's found. But when we compare with the subfossil database, it's one of the most frequent species found as a subfossil during the Mesolithic. That means or implies that this particular habitat was very strongly represented, well linked across the whole landscape. The idea that it was closed canopy at that time is not substantiated by the beetles. And it's not just one beetle. Keith has also looked at other beetles. He's come up with 2 that is associated with heartwood decay in large open grown trees, and others with the specialists of these lateral low branches. And he's definitely convinced that subfossil beetles define the type of tree and type of landscape better than the pollen does. And so it's our ancient trees that are telling us about past landscapes, and which is very exciting for people who are interested in old trees. So we all are aware of the very important role that these veteran trees and ancient trees play in terms of hosting and acting as arcs, taking species through time. And it's not just the beetles, it's the fungi, both the decay fungi and the mycorrhizal, and also the lichens, and also the other associated bats and birds and amphibians, etc., that use them for roosting and nesting. So many of those species are Section 41 species. And Natural England did a study of the habitat requirements of the species that were associated with, and they call it woodlands, but really we're talking about species that are associated with trees. And they looked at this, and they came up with the highest number of these Section 41 priority species are associated with veteran trees, or in the edge of the habitat, or in the scrub mosaics. Not so many in the closed canopy, and far fewer in the coppice. Yet we put our resources into ancient woodland, which is really this category. Where is the emphasis on these, which are really the wood pasture and parkland habitat? This is where we've got to really focus. And again, other work, this is England, and a previous one was England, but I think it would equate as well in Scotland. And this was looking at condition indicators for the National Forest Inventory. And if you look at veteran trees, almost totally unfavourable. In fact, their research indicated that 99 point something woodlands had no veteran trees in them at all, and was also extremely poor in decaying woods. So we're not putting our priorities where we should be, which is into the wood pasture and parkland, or the old growth savanna, as I like to call it, habitat, which is so important in the UK. And it's not just about individual trees, it's about assemblages, because the assemblages are more than the sum of the individual parts. And that's why we ought to be considering this as savanna. Now, this is Cadzo, and it's an SSSI, and it's going to be a fabulous visit to look at some of these trees. However, this is, and it's thanks to Judy Dowling and a group of ancient tree inventory volunteers that we've got some figures for this particular location. But when we visited with the Ancient Tree Forum, we were concerned about these new trees that have been planted in more of a forestry type approach. And they are filling in the open space between these trees. Ultimately, they will threaten the old trees and also uh, produce straight single stems without the horizontal lateral limbs and the whole full canopy. So great concern about that. I hope that at some stage that's being addressed. But you're going to have a great time visiting the site tomorrow. Judy and her team recorded 431 trees in this location. Where in other parts of Europe would you find such a concentration of really important old trees outside the UK? It's a hugely important international site. It's not just us. Way back in 86, Paul Harding and Francis Rose were really trying to talk about this old growth ecosystem which survives in this park-like landscape closest to the wildwood than we're led to believe. And of course, the richness is associated with the long lifespans of the trees. It's of unique international importance. And instead of calling it Caledonian pine woodland, let's call it Caledonian pine savanna, and not Pinus sylvestris. Let's call it Pinus savanna. So I may be running out of time, but just very briefly, I also want to talk about other values of these open grown trees. Some work done by the BBC indicated these open grown trees have enormous crown surface areas, have enormous numbers of leaves. We know that 20 times as many leaves on an open grown tree as that in a tree in a forestry plantation. And they have these wonderful lower fattening lateral branches. And they also looked at the carbon sequestration. They said the tree was sequestering 10 tons of wood above ground, and it was sequestering a lot of wood in 1 year. It's an amazing powerhouse in one particular tree. And another aspect, this happens to be my favorite tree. It's the King John oak. Look at those lateral branches that are coming out of this 11-meter oak in Devon. But the point here is, it's, as we've heard, so many of these trees are disappearing and dying through one reason or another. And it's important to try and take cuttings from them to regenerate the genomes of some of these trees. And that's what we're doing here, have done here in Windsor, have actually managed to generate new generations of the King John oak. But the key thing is, when we establish these trees, it's got to be the right tree in the right space. Finally, then, just to say that other countries are really leading the way. Look at Germany. Here is a nationally important tree that's got a national symbol on the front there. We look at the girth of that tree by any of the trees that I've been talking about in my presentation. Here in Norway, they've passed legislation this century to protect all hollowing oaks outside forests. That's national legislation in Norway, and has had some interesting repercussions in terms of work that's been done to look at root systems and identify roots of trees in the process. And here, Poland. This is a picture taken in 1991, prior to Poland becoming a member of the EU. There, on the trunk, is the symbol that it's on a national database. Other trees can do it. Why have we not been able to do it when we are the hosts of some of the most important mature maiden trees in internationally in Europe? It is astonishing that we haven't been able to do it yet. Anyway, the ancient tree voice is needed now more than ever. Thank you for listening, and good luck, and let's try and raise the voice as strongly as we can. Thank you.